Welcome to another Thursday night Bible study, brought to you as a ministry of SIGBC.
We're talking today about the idea of a time for everything. Now, our years are divided into 365 days, as everybody who has seen a calendar knows. And one revolution around the sun gives us those 365 and a quarter days, technically, which means every 4 years or so we have a leap year where we have 29 days in February, which gives us 336 days in that particular year every 4 years or so. So, here, let me invite everybody over real quick here. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. So, what we contemplate from this fact that the one revolution around the sun is 365 days, and the moon circling the earth every 28 days or so, our calendar divided into 12 months, brings us back to a new beginning. And so I think it behooves us, as we end what we have designated as the old, and as we begin what we have designated as the new, it behooves us to stop and to think a little bit about time. And this coming Sunday, we're going to be talking about the fact that as Christians, old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. And when we contemplate time, when we contemplate new beginnings, usually we're pretty grateful for the opportunity to start over again. I remember my mother, when I was younger, reading a poem that has stuck with me all these years. I never did memorize it, but I used to like to read it. I haven't read it in the last couple of years, but I used to like to read it at the end of the year, because the meaning behind the poem was that there was a teacher who was teaching a class, and so the teacher had given all the students a piece of paper for them to practice their writing on. And they were supposed to do perfect cursive on the paper. But this one young person, the student, had made a mess, had messed up the paper, and now they came ashamedly, because back then paper was a very expensive commodity. As a matter of fact, paper was so expensive that most students studied with a chalkboard to practice their writing instead of a piece of paper. But the poem goes that the student went to the teacher ashamed and said, may I have a new leaf? I've spoiled this one. And then the teacher gives the child a new piece of paper and says, do better now, my child. And then the poem goes right into I came before the throne of grace, and talks about our lives and how we've done things in this past year that we may not be proud of. And so we come before God and say, God, I've spoiled this year. And God says, here, I'll give you a new one. Do better now, my child. And so that's the idea behind what we're going to be contemplating tonight, which is a time for everything. Bible says in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, there is a time for everything. So God does give us opportunities to accomplish what He desires of us, and we have the opportunity to either choose to do or choose to neglect that which God has given us the responsibility of accomplishing. And so He says there's a time for everything, a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. This year has been an emotional roller coaster year for us in some ways, because we were supposed to have 2 grandchildren born this year. One, Forest, was due in the late summer, and then Serafina was due in November. And Debbie even flew back to America to help prepare the way for the arrival of the new baby, and then help with the household cares as the new baby came. And yet, in August, Serafina passed, and we experienced a sad event rather than a happy event. The happy event of the birth, the sad event of the death. And so Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes is just talking about the fact that in life there will be times of sadness and there will be times of great happiness. There's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up. Now, what does he mean by a time to tear down and a time to build? Well, here in Japan, that is a lot more evident than in other countries, because in Japan, the value of land is based upon its usability. So if you have a house, even if it is used, that is on a plot of land and that house is usable, then the value of the land is higher because of the house. However, if the house is old and dilapidated, then the value of the land itself goes down, because you have to take into consideration the cost of tearing the old building out before you can put a new building in. And so here in Japan, that can run between 150 and sometimes as much as 400 man just to tear the old building down. But it's necessary in order to build the new one on the same lot. And so there is a time to tear down and a time to build. There's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. At weddings we rejoice, at funerals we weep. And I often say, when contemplating emotions in the human heart, that there really is no such thing as a negative emotion. There are negative expressions of emotions, but emotions are a gift from God. They are what separate us from machines. And so experiencing deep and heartfelt emotions is a good and positive thing, as long as we recognize that there are times where it is good to mourn, just like there are times where it is good to laugh, or to dance, or to weep. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. I remember the stories in the Bible about when Israel was being invaded, and they scattered stones in the fields so that they wouldn't have an easy time plowing the fields after they were conquered. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. Usually whenever you want to plant a harvest and prepare your fields, you have to get all those stones out so that you can plow without breaking your plowshare. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. Now, these three things, three ideas that we just read about, are all interrelated, because we have to know when we have done enough so that we can move on. And so the idea of a time to search and a time to give up means there reaches a certain point, and if you've lost something, it becomes counterproductive in your use of time to continue searching for that thing. Fortunately, nowadays we have cell phones that if we lose them, we have other devices that will help us to find them. The other day, I was trying to find my cell phone because it had disappeared. And so I went all through the house looking for it. All the rooms that I'd been in, couldn't find it. Went out to the car first because that was the last place I had used it. And no cell phone to be found. And so I came upstairs, went all through the house, and finally I got out my iPad. And I said, all right, I gotta find this cell phone. So I entered I told Siri actually, find my cell phone. and it started pinging. And I thought, I looked all through the house. There was no sound coming from the house. I thought it was in the car. Let me go see the car. And so I went out to the car, and there was the cell phone underneath the seat on the passenger side. It had dropped down and it slid under the seat. And the only way I would have found it is if I had pinged it. Otherwise, there's no way I would have found it. And so there is a time to search and a time to give up. There's a time to keep and a time to throw away. As in, some things are valuable and some things you just got to let go of. This is a new Year tradition for the Japanese, where at the end of the year is the busiest time at the city dump, because everybody tries to clean their houses and get rid of all the old stuff in preparation for a clean new year. And so this is very familiar with the Japanese culture, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. And God has made all things beautiful in His time. There's nothing for us to fret or worry about, because there are times of happy emotions in the life of a Christian, and there are times of sad emotions in the life of a Christian. It's not necessarily a bad thing to experience sadness. And so Solomon, in his wisdom, the book of Ecclesiastes, as he's trying to find meaning in life, recognizes that there is a time for all things, and that in His time, God makes all things beautiful. In fact, we have a song that we sing in church. In His time, He makes all things beautiful in His time. Lord, please show me every day what Your will is, so that I might walk in Your time. God, if we trust Him, and God, as we lean on Him, will make all things beautiful in His time. Book of Romans chapter 8 verse 28. We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are the called according to His purpose. So these are experiences that we have that have nothing to do with whether we've been good or bad. They have nothing to do with whether we have failed or been successful. There is a time for all things in life. However, there do come times when we acknowledge that we have failed. And that's when a new year is the most meaningful, because we can purpose in our hearts afresh and anew, I will do better this next year. I will do what is necessary to maintain a heart that is close to God and is pleasing to God. One of the best things that we encourage our church family to do is to read the Bible on a regular basis. And you can read the Bible at your leisure on a daily basis, maybe one or two verses. You can read the Bible on a more structured system, maybe one chapter a day. You can read the Bible in a divided section where you can read it in a whole year, 365 days. Or, as we've done for, I think, 20 times now in the past 12 years or so, there is the opportunity sometimes to read the Bible in 90 days. That's about the fastest. Well, I think the fastest person to read through the Bible in our church when we were doing a 90-day Bible study was Anita. She did it in like 24 days, something like that. But having a time where you say, okay, this year I'm going to have as my goal to read through the Bible, because I desire to know more about God and His will and His way. A time for everything. Let's make sure that includes a time for prayer and a time for reading God's Word. Thanks for joining us again. We got to let it go now, and we'll see you on Sunday as we continue contemplating this idea of all things new. Have a good night.
Thank you for listening. You can also join us in person or live on Facebook every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Japan time. This has been a ministry of Sakahogi International Grace Baptist Church.